Ida Early Comes Over the Mountain by Robert Birch. The Departure. The first day of October was the day after the program at school. Somehow Randall knew Ida was not there before he even walked into the house that afternoon. He couldn't explain why he felt the way he did. He only knew that it would be like Ida, if she was planning to go away, to leave after something special had happened instead of at an ordinary time. And yesterday had been special, all right. He hated to think of Ida not being at home, but at the same time it shouldn't be a real surprise to anyone. She'd tried to prepare the family for getting along without her. He looked in Ida's room. Her knapsack was gone, as he'd known it would be, and he went back to the kitchen. The twins were spreading peanut butter and jelly on biscuits that had been put in the cupboard. "Ida's left us," said Randall. "She'll be back," said Clay, sounding certain of it. Dewey was sure of it, too, and all afternoon the twins insisted that Ida would be home any minute. They made up things she might be doing. "I'll bet she's gone to the drug store and is eating ice cream right now," said Clay. "Yes," agreed Dewey, "and then she'll buy us a jawbreaker apiece and come straight home. She'll buy a yellow one for you and a red one for me." "No, I want the red one," said Clay. Randall said, "Will you cut it out? Ida's gone." The twins were quiet for a few minutes. Then Dewey said, "I know where Ida is. She's at that store where old men play checkers around the stove." "Yeah," said Clay, "that's it. I'll bet she's beating them, every one." Later they had another idea where Ida had gone. "She probably went out to Harley's store to make sure the bear's all right," said Dewey. "That's it," said Clay. "She's there right now, patting the bear on the head and making friends with it." "She may bring it home with her," said Dewey. Nothing Randall or Ellen said could convince the twins that Ida would not return. After supper Mr. Sutton said, "Remember, she told us that some day she'd be gone." "Like a wild goose," said Clay, "but I don't believe she meant it." "Yes, I think she meant it," said Mr. Sutton. "Some people are like that and have to keep moving." He pulled the twins onto his lap. "What do you say that instead of being sad, we try to be happy that we had Ida with us for as long as we did?" The twins slid down from his lap. "Come on, Dewey," said Clay. "Let's go onto the porch and see if we see Ida coming." Mr. Sutton shook his head as they walked out. Then he said, "I better write your Aunt Ernestine and ask if she'll come help us out again." "Couldn't we manage without her?" asked Randall. "Yes, please, couldn't we?" said Ellen. "The two of you can look after yourselves, but Dewey and Clay need a little help along, and there's cooking and house cleaning to do." "We'll do the work," said Ellen. "And we'll keep an eye on the twins," promised Randall. Dewey and Clay came back into the room, and Mr. Sutton put an arm around them. "Do you think we can get along by ourselves, or should I send for Aunt Ernestine?" "Send for Ida Early," said Dewey. "We want her back." "All of us want Ida Early back," said Mr. Sutton. "Don't send for Aunt Ernestine," said Clay. "She's mean." "No, she's not mean," said Mr. Sutton. "She's just a little stern, and she's cross sometimes." "She's mean," insisted Clay. Mr. Sutton pushed back in his chair. "Maybe we would be happier if we tried it on our own." "We can do it," said Ellen. "I'll cook if Randall will do the dishes." "And we could all pitch in on the house cleaning," said her father. "If each one of us did our part to keep things in order, it shouldn't be too bad. I can do some of the cooking." "We can help too," said Dewey. "Sure you can," said Mr. Sutton. "You'll both have to be big boys now and not get into a lot of mischief, all right?" "We'll shake hands on it," said Clay, holding out his hand to his father. Dewey held out his hand too. Mr. Sutton shook hands solemnly with Clay and Dewey, and then leaned over and gave both of them a kiss on the forehead. "We've struck us another bargain," said Dewey, as he and Clay went in search of the tiddlywinks board. But later in the evening they cried because Ida was not there to put them to bed. Randall tucked the covers around them. He tried to think of a funny story to tell them, but none came to mind. If it would do any good, he said, I'd cry too. The family managed to get along, but it was not like the good times when Ida was there. Ellen tried, but she was not a very good cook, and she knew how to prepare only 3 dishes: scrambled eggs, stew, and macaroni and cheese. Mr. Sutton helped, but he had been especially busy at the lumber yard during October, and had not been at home to do much of the cooking. November had started out in the same way. Also, Mr. Sutton had never done much in the kitchen himself. However, he became enthusiastic about improving his skills, and the family looked forward to meals that he prepared. When he wasn't there, they ate scrambled eggs, stew, or macaroni with cheese. The children were careful not to complain about anything, lest their father decide that Aunt Ernestine should come back after all. But they did sorely miss Ida Early. Randall knew that it was far more than her good cooking that made the difference. It was Ida herself. One afternoon Randall sat at the kitchen table. His books were spread out in front of him, but he wasn't really studying. J.C. came in. If he had knocked or called out, Randall hadn't heard him. "Say," said J.C., "are you in a daze or something?" "Oh, howdy, J.C. I didn't know you were here." "What were you thinking about so serious?" "I was thinking about Ida early. I wonder what's become of her." "Didn't I tell you?" said J.C. "Jasper thought he saw her." "I didn't know Jasper even knew her," said Randall. Jasper was J.C.'s cousin. He drove a taxi in Atlanta, but came to the mountains every now and then to visit relatives. "Yeah, he was at the carnival the time she showed up that fellow Noonan throwing baseballs." "But where's he seen her since then?" "In Atlanta, out at Candler Field." "The airfield? What was she doing?" "Selling hot dogs and hamburgers at a stand just outside the terminal. He saw her when he was driving off. At least he believed it was her." Ellen called from her room. "I see Mr. Askew." Mr. Askew was the mail carrier. "Is he stopping?" asked Randall. "Yes, he's leaving something." "Okay, I'll go see what it is," said Randall, and he and J.C. walked down to the mailbox. There was a letter addressed to Mr. Sutton. "I'll bet it's from Ida Early," said Randall. "Does it have a return address?" asked J.C. "No, but it's postmarked Atlanta." "Maybe that's why you were thinking about her so strong a while ago. Maybe there were thought waves going around in the air because her letter was almost here." J.C. was a big believer in thought waves. "I don't know what it was," said Randall, "but something's made me think of her more than ever." Ellen and the twins also believed the letter was from Ida, and all four children were at the door when their father returned home. "No," he said when he opened the letter, "it's not from Ida. It's from your Aunt Ernestine." Randall agreed with Clay, who said disgustedly, "Why couldn't it have been from Ida?" "Cheer up," said Mr. Sutton when he'd read the letter. "Kathy Alice may come to see you." All the children groaned. "Ernestine wants to meet your Aunt Myrtle and Uncle Ross and Kathy Alice here on Thanksgiving Day." "Tell her we won't be home," said Ellen. "Where will we be?" asked Dewey. "Anywhere except here," said Ellen, "if they're coming to see us." "Right," said Randall. "Now be ashamed," scolded Mr. Sutton, but he was smiling. "Of course we'll be glad to see them, even though I'm sure the trip is mainly to see what we're all doing wrong." Randall said, "And it means Aunt Ernestine's going to decide to stay and manage us." Mr. Sutton said, "Yes, it probably does. But maybe we need her. You and Ellen are having to work too hard. I want you to have more time to play and visit your friends and enjoy being young." Randall hated to think of Aunt Ernestine being put back in charge of the household. It was true that he'd had more work to do since Ida had been gone, but Aunt Ernestine wouldn't take over any of his chores outside, drawing water, milking, even sometimes chopping wood and hauling it to the woodbox in the kitchen, the way Ida did. And inside he and Ellen would have as many chores as ever, whether Aunt Ernestine was there or not. Only Aunt Ernestine would fuss at them if they didn't work fast or do everything her way. As he often did, Randall thought of Ida and wished she were there. He smiled when he recalled the rope trick she'd done and the way she'd tied up the bear. That had been 6 weeks ago, but it was still talked about every day at school. Randall could see Ida as clearly as if he were watching a motion picture of her, walking off the stage with one shoe on and the other in her hand, grinning and waving to the cheering crowd. He was glad to have that picture in his mind, Ida triumphant, Ida in high spirits. Randall and Ellen tried to convince their father that they could continue to look after the house and the twins, that it wasn't too much work for them. "We'll see," said Mr. Sutton, and Randall suspected that "we'll see" in this instance meant Aunt Ernestine would move back in with them. It would be awful, he knew. Almost Thanksgiving. Mrs. Brough, at a farm down the mountain, raised turkeys, and Mr. Sutton had asked her to reserve a nice one for him. The weekend before Thanksgiving, on Saturday afternoon, Randall and the twins walked to the farm to fetch the turkey home. At the shed where the turkeys were penned up, Mrs. Brough said, "They're all about the same size. Take your choice." Dewey pointed at a large tom. "I like that one," he said. "This'n?" asked Mrs. Brough, reaching for the turkey that was pecking at her shoelace. "No," said Clay. "Let's take the one in the corner." Randall settled it. "We'll take the one you pick out for us." Mrs. Brough picked up the one at her feet. "This should make a fine Thanksgiving Day feast for you." She had Randall hold it while she tied its feet together with a piece of twine. "Now," she explained, "if you turned it loose it couldn't go far." Clay and Dewey chatted with the turkey on the way home. It made a contented gurgling noise as if it were talking back to them. When they were home, Randall untied the turkey's feet and put it in the hen house. It spread its tail and gave a loud gobble. Then it stood quietly and the twins patted. "Come on," said Randall. "Let's go inside." Reluctantly, the twins followed him into the house. Mr. Sutton was in the kitchen. "Is the gobbler a good one?" he asked. "Good and heavy," said Randall. "I'd hate to have toted it another mile." Dewey said, "Maybe we ought to just keep it around for a while." "Yes," said Clay. "Let's let it grow some more." "Oh, no," said Mr. Sutton. "Don't start that. It's our company dinner for Thursday. We've got too many chickens around here that can't be put in the pot because they're your pets. So in the interest of us having an extra special Thanksgiving dinner, please don't make a pet of the turkey." The twins didn't make any promise about it, and Randall could imagine they'd come up with a way to spare the turkey. He was trying to think what it might be when suddenly there was a loud noise outside. "What in the world?" asked Ellen, who had just come into the room. "A motorcycle out on the road," Mr. Sutton said. Randall looked out the window. "Only it's not on the road, it's coming up our driveway." By then the noise was so loud that no one could be heard above it. The motorcycle circled around the house and stopped in the backyard. There were two people on it, and one of them, the passenger, got off. The driver raced the motor, vroom, and roared out of the yard, vroom, vroom. The other person, tall and wearing boots, riding pants, leather jacket, and an aviator's cap with goggles, walked up the steps, across the back porch, and into the kitchen. Randall held the door open and stood back. The caller threw off the goggles and cap. "Ida Early!" squealed Ellen, running to her. "No other," said Ida with a big grin. "How's everybody?" "Everybody's fine," said Mr. Sutton. He went over and shook hands with her. "All of us are happy to see you." Ida took off her jacket and, without turning her head, threw it across the room. It landed on a peg of the hat rack. "I've been down in Atlanta for a while," she said, "but I miss my true friends." She looked straight at Ellen and Randall. "In fact, I missed all my friends." She picked up Clay in one arm and Dewey in the other, so I decided it might be a good idea to come back. "You decided right," said Mr. Sutton. He went across to the cook stove and added a chunk of wood to the fire in it. "So I told 'em at the airfield they'd have to get along without me." Clay and Dewey patted Ida lovingly on the head. Her hair had been cut short again and had a fresh wind-blown look. "What were you doing at the airfield?" asked Clay. "Oh, not much of anything," said Ida, and Clay looked disappointed until she added, "I just did stunts for 'em whenever they put on air shows. But to tell you the truth, I was getting a little bit bored walking around on the wings of airplanes, jumping from one to another while they were flying way up high and that sort of thing." She gave Clay and Dewey a kiss on the cheek and put them down. I was ready for something more exciting. "Like coming to live with us?" said Dewey. "Yeah," said Ida, "that's it, like coming to live with you." Mr. Sutton, slicing ham for Ellen to fry, said, "Have a seat and be company tonight. Ellen and I'll cook supper." "Thank you kindly," said Ida, sitting down in the big rocking chair. The twins stood in front of her and watched as she rolled a cigarette. Randall sat on the rag rug near the fireplace and watched too. He knew what she would do next. Ida stood up, struck a match on the seat of her riding pants, and lit the cigarette. Then she sat down again, dangled the bag of tobacco on one finger, and said, "Anybody care for a smoke?"